JavaScript. One of the good documentation that I've found about promises online is by MDN, and we can clearly say it defines promise as an object that represents eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. So, what does this mean exactly? So, you can imagine like when working with JavaScript application, maybe in front end or in Node.js, we sometimes have to interact with other systems. To take a specific example, in front end, whenever we make an API call, it has to be asynchronous so that we don't stop the entire application waiting for the response since JavaScript is single threaded. So to handle these asynchronous operations, we have promises, and promises help us make an operation, and it will hold the value, represent the completed value, and then we can come back to it. In promises have three states. One is pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So pending is when we initiate an promise and it's not completed yet. We are waiting for it. So that's pending. Fulfilled when it's successfully completed and we have a resulting value. Failed when it got rejected for some reason. So to quickly see an example of it, let's come back to our code. And so let's look at the example of promise class. So the way it works is you can create a function, simple promise. And to make this function be a promise and asynchronous, we just need to return a new object of promise. And this gets two methods, two arguments. The first is resolve and the second is reject. So we call resolve when we want to successfully complete it and reject when it's failed. So now to take an example, so we can just do quickly resolve. Yep, it's done. So now how do we call it? So to call it, we just do simple promise. We call it, and these are thenable. So you get a then method on it. So this gets called when the function is resolved. So let's take response and console log the response. And let's in here resolve the value 5. So this is the resolved value, fulfilled value, which we'll get. So now if I run this function, we can see 5 got printed since 5 got resolved. Now, how does it all work? What's the steps by it works? So let's say I have console log before promise, console.log promise. Now we have this. Now if I execute it, it didn't save the file. So now I execute it. So you can see before promise got executed, then after promise, and then the promise got resolved. So on a promise, it didn't wait for this command to finish. Rather, it went to the next step. It continued execution, and when the promise got finished, that's when it printed the 5 value. So that's how promises work. Just to show an example, we can even reject. So if we reject, we have something called catch here, and you can actually take argument as error and console.log error. Now if I printed, so okay, I should have done like this. We know when it's response and when it's error. Yeah, when it's fulfilled. So this we can see error, and in the other case it was resolved. Now so this is all promise does. You can do other things. So in here you can do async operations, or yeah, asynchronous operations. So let's do an example, and let's do example of calling an async operation. And for the async operation, I'm going to use a package called isomorphic unfetch. So let's add it. Now that the package is added, let's import fetch from it. So I'm going to do constant fetch equals require isomorphic unfetch. Now within here we'll do an API call. So to API call, let's do response equals fetch, and let's call this endpoint cat facts. to get the facts for a cat. Not this being promised, we can do then. And once we get the response, other thing about promises is they offer then. So these are chain promises. So you can actually a promise, you can attach the then static method to promise, and then you can attach other then. So it will just go down the change, and you can resolve a new promise in each then. So to take example here, we can do then.json. So this will resolve the JSON method here, and then we can do again response, and then we can do resolve response. And let's also do dot. Let's do this try and catch error if any error happens, and then we can reject with error. So there, we don't need this, so just format the document. Cool. So it will call cat facts, and then it will resolve.promise and then resolve it. So in here we can see we should get it. So let's call the method node index.js. So before promise, after promise, and then we got the resolution. On average, a cat sleeps for 16 hours a day. So this is how exactly we make an API call and promises work. Now that the code is written, we can actually simplify this code a lot by a modern syntax of async await. So we can make this just to make a function asynchronous, just use the async keyword with the function thing. So you can just do async function simple promise async, and in this we can do we can actually call the promise.all. So we can, or we can return the promise. So we can just do return or constant res equals await fetch and call the API, and then we can just return await res.json. So it's that easy. So we just, if we comment it out and call this method instead, so that's pretty awesome. So we can see the response and it's working. So that's pretty cool. Now let's look at the other function. So other static methods attached to promise called Promise.all. So I'll just comment this code out. I'll call this look at Promise.all. Now, for Promise.all, as we can see, the use case here is you can pass in multiple promises as an array, and it will wait until all of them are fulfilled or at least one of them is rejected. So let's look at the use case here. So let's say in your application you want to call multiple APIs. Now we cannot just do be like call this API and then await and call another fetch API. So sequentially, so take doesn't make sense. So it's best we can call them all parallelly. So that's where we use Promise.all. So very simple way, the way it works is we have this API call Promise.all method, and in here we can pass array with all the API or all the promises we want to call. So just for simplification, I'll just make an uh, so let's modify this method itself. This method will take API, and this will call API and return API. Now we can just add another function called async function promise all, and what we can do is we can do return promise.all, and this will be await. So we'll await all of them. And now we can pass an array. So we can call simple promise async and call one of them APIs. So we can call the, so I've got two APIs here. So one is the cat API and the other is async API. So we can just pass in the cat facts API. And second, we can call the task API. So now if I save it and I call it, so let's see, let's call promise.all. Yeah, I think it looks good, so it should call it. So let's call our program. So we can see we got two methods, an array in response with the two entries. The first one is the first promise resolved, and the second is second promise resolved. So it takes an array and returns an array with the fulfilled value of that promise. Now, if one of the promise rejects, it's instantly rejects. So for example, let's do here, like instead of ninja, let's call ninjas. So domain doesn't exist. So when I call it, so it gives an fetch error. So you can see it comes to error, fetch error, request to that one failed. So overall, promise.all waits for all of them to be fulfilled and rejects as soon as one of them rejects. And one of the use cases as mentioned, like in your program, you want to interact with multiple systems. So for example, let's say you want to call an API where it's paginated and you want to call all of the pages together. So you can make multiple APIs with page 1, page 2, page 3. And you want to say that if one of the APIs fails, fail the entire fetch call, because the actual result, let's say you are doing multiple page call and calculating a value based on the results from all of them, that value will be inaccurate. So you want to fail off all of it. So we can use promise.all. So that's how promise.all works. Now let's look at the next API. So I'll just copy this. So the next API is all settled. So just need to make a change like promise.all_settled. Now what this does is we can again pass multiple promises, and it will wait for all of them to be fulfilled or rejected. So that means a it will give results, like even if one of them rejects, it will give the reason why it rejected, or if it fulfilled, it will give the value which got fulfilled. Now, the major use case here is, let's say a customer makes a call to your backend service, and your backend service needs to check permission from multiple systems before updating. So make it atomic. Now, what happens is, let's say one of the systems permission fails. You want to fail the operation, but you want to inform customers what are the systems for which the authorization or the permissions failed, so we can fix them. So in that case, we can use promise.all_settled. So let's take an example of success scenario. So I have it here, promise.all_settled. I have the value here and the reason. So response, sorry. So I'll just call it. And we can see both the promises got fulfilled. Let's just print the value so that we can see. So response dot map, and let's r dot value. So you can see both the values got resolved and we get the correct value. Now let's say one of them fails. So JAWS, and in this case I would do dot value or r dot reason. So you can see the other one failed with the reason that the fetch doesn't exist. To show how the actual response looks, let's just remove this and see how the actual response looks. In this case, where one of them errors, so you can see one of them rejected. So you can see if all of them fulfilled, the operations are fulfilled, or if some of them are rejected, just accumulate them and pass the rejected response why it failed. So this is a use case of all settle. Uh, I use it a lot. Now, last not the least, let's look at promise.race. So again, promise.race. So again, we can pass on multiple promises, but the good thing is in here, as soon as one of the promise resolves, it just returns the value. Like all of them will be fulfilled, but it will return the one which resolved the fastest. And it will, as soon as one of the promise rejects, it will just fail the operation. So let's look at the example here. We are calling multiple promises, and we just do promise.raise. So as soon as I call it, you can see the cat got resolved because it returned earlier, but the value of cat got returned because it got resolved faster, but both of them got resolved. So to show that it's not smoking mirrors, if I fail the cat operation and I call it again, so you can see the entire operation failed. But let's fail it here also. .coms to make the URL wrong. So see, it failed. Whereas the cat was resolving fast. So now if I remove those, the cat, no, the response got resolved fast. So it totally depends on the latency, which one's faster. But yeah, you can see one of them failed. As soon as one of them fails, it just fails. So that's what promise.race is. Uh, use case here is like you can check my latency from multiple systems, or if one of them fails, just report it. So that could be one of the use case, though I've not used it more promise.race much yet. The other properties of promise or methods I want to talk about, which are important one, are promise.resolve and promise.reject. So these two are very important and very useful. So what we can do is, if you have a function, let's say uh, test, and you just want to resolve a w, so you can do promise.resolve, just return the value that you want to resolve. I'll just commit these. And if I do test dot then r console.log r, so it went wrong. Ah, no, there's nothing being returned. So promise not was not being returned. That's why it throws an error. But if I do this, so the value gets returned. And similarly, if I do reject, then I have to have a catch error. Now, these two methods, promise.resolve and promise.reject, are very important and used a lot. One of the major use case of these two are in the test cases. So let's say you are writing a test case for a promise method or an asynchronous function, and you want to mock a value for it to resolve or reject to with certain value. So in your test cases, you can use promise.resolve or promise.reject to mimic the functionality of asynchronous method. So yeah, uh, these are the Promise API, the use case, and the static methods I wanted to cover in this session. Do let me know in comments if you have any questions or any suggestions, and also let me know if they have a topic in mind I should make a video about next. Thanks.